Hello and welcome to the Arc Woman podcast. This is an exploration of womankind. Here we discuss what it is to be a woman in the modern world while utilizing ancient and modern modalities in tandem to create a bounty of health for the body, mind and spirit. Hello everyone and welcome back to the pod. Today we are going to be talking about a really sensitive topic, which is terminations. And I'd just like to say at the very start that I am pro-choice. I believe that a woman's life is far more important than the fetus that she does not want to grow, birth, and parent. I hold no judgment towards anyone who chooses termination. If you don't agree with termination, that's great. You don't need to have one. It's really common. So around 73 million induced abortions take place worldwide each year. So 6 out of 10 of all unintended pregnancies end in a termination. So about 6 out of 10 women in childbearing age have had a termination. It's very, 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 very common, which is so bizarre because no one is talking about it. In the lead up to researching for this podcast, I was like, okay, so many people are going to have support for women post-termination. There's lots of videos online, there's lots of blog posts, there's lots of conversation and content around what a termination is, what it does to the body, but no one's talking about the hormonal shifts that happen afterwards. No one's really talking about the risks. No one's talking about the nutritional deficiencies. No one is talking, about the guilt and the shame, and other emotions of sadness that might come up after a termination though. So I really wanted to make a resource that was free, easy to listen to and supportive for women who are looking down the path of having a termination, considering what's right for them. This podcast also includes a cameo from an amazing psychotherapist, Krissy, who I've had on previously. We were talking about how to heal after sexual trauma and how you can heal your sexuality and your connection with your body. And she's going to be talking to us about the psychoanalytical ways that we can deal with, our mental and emotional health after a termination. So she's going to be answering a few of the questions that a few of you put in my Instagram post. I put up a poll about termination and what you wanted to know, and there were so many questions around how you can support your mental health and your spiritual and emotional health. And so Krissy will be answering your questions, will be giving us a few affirmations as well. In this podcast, we will be covering medication termination, so the pill form of termination, the surgical termination, the risks and benefits of each. We're also going to be talking about what happens after termination. So the hormonal shifts post-termination, your return of your menstrual cycle, what happens to your hormonal cycle as well. We're also going to be talking about emotional changes and how you can support serotonin, GABA, and dopamine. We're also going to be covering a lot on nutrition. So we're going to be covering some vital nutrients that you can increase your whole food intake of and possibly even supplement. And we are going to be including a few different herbs. And I will just say at the start of this though, with herbs, please make sure you're working with a practitioner. And also any nutritional advice I give on this podcast is super general. You can't just apply it to yourself, especially after a termination. I think it's really important to check in with a naturopath or nutritionist or even like a functional doctor if you go through this process to make sure that these things are actually right for you, because I don't want to be saying, hey, increase your copper and your iron if you have estrogen dominance, right? So this is really generalized. Please just don't apply everything to yourself. Do a blood test, work with someone, learn about what your biomarkers are and what they represent so you can have more of a functional approach to this and you can actually personalize this advice to you. To start this conversation, I think it's really important just to have a quick anatomical physiological lesson on what actually happens during pregnancy. So to start this conversation on how to heal after abortion, we need to talk about that first because, we can have a termination up to 16 weeks, which is the latest term you can have a termination, right? So a lot can happen in that period of time. Generally, you have a huge influx of hormone production. So let's go through them one by one. So human chronic gonadotropin, so HCG. So this is a hormone that's released as there is implantation in your uterus, and that sends off this HCG, and that tells the corpus luteum to keep producing progesterone, right? And progesterone thickens and stimulates the uterine lining for implantation of a fertilized egg and prevents you from sloughing out, and actually having a period and, not knowing kind of having like an unknown miscarriage of sorts. And so HCG stays around to make sure that progesterone stays around. up until a certain point that the fetus produces its own progesterone from its placenta, right? But you still have HCG hanging around. You still have lots of progesterone. You also have lots of estrogen hanging around. So estrogen helps develop sexual traits to maintain a healthy pregnancy, but it also increases the darkening of your nipples. You might also see like a faint line of, hair from your lower abdomen to your pubic area. And you will also feel like your hips and your breasts will get larger and fuller in preparation for birth, pregnancy, and parenting. You will also see an increase in T3 and T4. And this is really important because this increases to meet the demands of a growing fetus metabolically, right? So in the last trimester of a pregnancy, it's like equivalent to a marathon every single day. So from the get-go of a pregnancy, there is a metabolic, need on your body, and things are changing from the very, very, very outset. And so the production of these hormones and what they do in the body puts a huge demand on the body, right? In the first trimester of pregnancy, the big focus is on, using, omega-3s and lots of different fats to form the nervous system of a fetus and also the blood and circulatory system. So from the get-go, before we even get into nutrition, I'm thinking, okay, there's a lot of omega-3s, there's lots of iron, copper, and vitamin C being used up in the body to grow this fetus. So as you heal after a termination, you will need to work in those nutrients. So you can see, already you're going, okay, like the liver is doing a lot of work to process unwanted, and unused hormones in the body. There's a lot of pressure on the circulatory system. There's a lot of pressure on all these different systems in the body to make sure that you are staying healthy and the fetus is staying healthy as well. So that's what's happening during pregnancy up until you have a termination. So let's talk about the two different types of termination. So there's a medication termination and there's a surgical termination. And I'm going to talk about the medication, before the surgical, just because I feel like that's actually the one that's used the most. One of the reasons why I think it's used the most is because it's way cheaper, way more affordable than the surgical termination. And I'm going to talk about the risks associated with it and what you should expect. So a medication termination, so the medication for the pill of the form of termination, it uses a combination of two different medications and two different pills. So the first one is mifepristone and the second one is misoprostol. So the first medication you take is mifepristone medication, and this blocks progesterone receptors, which halts the fetus from further development, and it also stops the uterine cavity from developing further, so you don't have to, you don't bleed out more than you need to. The second medication after you take the misoprostine is misoprostol, and this causes the cervix to soften and open, and this also causes some uterine contractions so you can expel the pregnancy. And this is considered safe to use up to 70 days from your last period or 10 weeks of pregnancy. And it does not work beyond that time period, but it is recommended to use beyond, as it is not recommended to use beyond as complications increase further along in pregnancy is developed, which makes total sense because the fetus does grow pretty rapidly, and beyond 10 weeks there is a huge rapid growth in the size, and so it's just not safe to do at home on your own, 70 days from your last period, or, within 10 weeks of pregnancy. That is the absolute limit. Even if you go beyond, 7 or 8 weeks, it's really risky, I would say, to do at home alone, and very, very painful as well because of the cramps, If you have, a larger pregnancy and you have, you also have the placenta in there as well. So it's not just the fetus that's growing, it's also you have all of this uterine cavity growing, you have all of this, packing on the uterine lining, so you kind of have a period there in a way. You also have the placenta, so you're not just passing a fetus, you're also passing everything else that grows that fetus as well. And so the further along you are, the higher the risk is for using medication terminations. So in the short term, when you take this medication, it will cause nausea and pain and bleeding as you expel the pregnancy, which is to be expected. You might also experience vomiting, diarrhea, dizziness, headaches, and chills. You might also feel hot flushes or like a brief fever. So this is kind of like the stress response that your body is going through because this medication is terminating a pregnancy when your body, the whole purpose of the reproductive system is to reproduce. So your body's going to try and do everything it can to keep this pregnancy, and it's going to go into a pretty deep stress response when, it's kind of being terminated. There's also a risk of really heavy bleeding. So you might have low iron after this type of termination. And because the blood loss you might actually have, changes in the pH of our vaginal microbiome. So the vaginal microbiome is pretty acidic from Lactobacillus crispatus. We talk about the vaginal microbiome in depth in one of my other podcasts with Dr. Moira Bradfield-Stratum. And we talk about how the vaginal microbiome is almost always really acidic, and we want it to be acidic because that's a part of the immune system. But if you have a medication termination, then you are going to be bleeding a lot, which is a part of the experience. It is a part of, the termination, which means that you have lots of iron hanging around in your vaginal microbiome, and it's going to be really alkaline. So your immune system in your vaginal microbiome for a short period of time is going to be under a lot of, it's going to have its guards down. And then iron, allows, pathogenic species of bacteria and yeast to grow. So you might be at a higher risk of infection. So you really want to be making sure that wherever you're doing this medication termination, that you're doing it in a safe, cool, sanitary environment. You really want to make sure you're clean and you have access to a clean bathroom through this process. I also would say if you can stay away from baths or anything like that in this period of time, that would also be really great, just to prevent any infections from taking place. There's also a risk of incomplete termination. So I really highly recommend, if you're choosing this form of termination, you will need to go and get an ultrasound to double check that everything has passed out, because you don't want to have to go through this really painful experience and then it doesn't work, and you need to go and do that process again, or you need to go and get a surgical termination. So that's really important. And we also need to keep in mind the psychological impacts, especially if you do this on your own. Please do not do this form or any form of termination on your own. I know so many women who said that the medication termination was the most painful thing they've ever experienced. And, it was very, very dark time. So if you're wanting to do that and you're listening to this, please make sure that you have someone with you throughout the entire process, somewhere you are clean, somewhere where you are safe, and where you can have some pain relief if you need it as well. So let's move on to the surgical termination. So the other form is a vacuum aspiration, which can be used up to 14 weeks of pregnancy. It's 95 to 99% effective, so it's more effective than the medication termination. And so this procedure uses a very gentle vacuum that removes the pregnancy. And the procedure takes 10 to 15 minutes to complete, but you will be in the clinic for longer than that. So when you arrive, you will be given a ultrasound, you will be screened, you will be talking to a nurse to make sure that you're okay, and then you will be taking hopefully sedative drugs to make sure that you are put under for the surgery, and you will most likely not be conscious for this surgery. I would say, just as a rule, if you are choosing this form, please make sure that general anesthetic is going to be used, because you want to be put under for this form of termination. You don't want to be awake for it. We really want to minimize any traumatic events happening, because you pick up on a lot of different things. In the moment you might feel you're fine, but as you're going through it, you don't really realize what you're picking up on. It might be like weeks or months or even years later, you might go, oh my gosh, that was a really traumatic experience for me and I wish I was put under for that. So I think it is just general rule, whenever you go and have a surgical termination, you will be put under, but just always clarify with your practitioner and your health practitioner, and just make sure that you are going to be put under. So during the first week afterwards, you should expect to see some irregular spotting, which is completely normal. And in this time, it's a really good idea not to use tampons or period cups. If you have a feeling of cramping for the first few days after, that is completely normal. There are some rare cases where there is damage to the cervix and uterus. So please make sure you sit down with your healthcare provider and you put them in the hot seat, and you absolutely make sure that they know how to prevent damage, and it is an absolute goal of theirs to make sure they prevent damage of your reproductive organs. So you should get your period within 4 to 6 weeks after each of these terminations. I have heard many women say that they get an incredibly heavy and painful period afterwards. Keep this in mind, and use the tips at the end of this podcast to avoid heavy, painful periods, because you can avoid them. If you haven't had a period after 6 weeks after either terminations, it's a really good idea to contact your healthcare provider and go and get an ultrasound and make sure that the termination has actually worked, and there's no other problems there as well. So let's go into what happens after a termination. So let's start right at the top with hormonal shifts post-termination. So you will get a drop in pregnancy hormones. So after the terminations, the level of pregnancy hormones like HCG, estrogen, and progesterone will drop, and they will drop very swiftly. Your body is very efficient. It's not going to make hormones that have a backbone of cholesterol, which is expensive to make, unless it's actually going to be used. So if there's no pregnancy, your body is going to immediately stop producing these hormones. It takes some time for HCG to return to pre-pregnancy levels, and it varies, but it generally happens between 1 to 9 weeks. So if you're like, okay, I'm not going to go to my healthcare provider, I'm not going to go and get an ultrasound and double check that the termination worked, I'm just going to take a pregnancy test, and you do a pregnancy test within 9 weeks, which a lot of women will do. If they haven't got a period within 7 weeks, they might start freaking out and go, oh my gosh, what's going on? And you might see the double line and go, oh my goodness, this termination didn't work. But it might just be the HCG, right, still in your system. So that's why I'm always like, don't do a pregnancy test after a termination to confirm that the termination worked, because HCG hangs around for a little bit longer. Always make sure you go and get an ultrasound. So that's generally what's going to be happening. Estrogen and progesterone. So these hormones decline. The body may experience symptoms similar to postpartum adjustments, such as mood swings, fatigue, and fluctuations in appetite. A drop in estrogen can also bring temporary symptoms like night sweats, hot flashes, or skin changes. And we will be talking about how you can prevent these things from happening later in the episode with some herbs and some nutrients that you can focus on. The next thing I think a lot of women are focused on is the return of the menstrual cycle, because I think it is just such a centralizing feeling, knowing when you are getting your period, knowing where you are in your cycle, and you can feel like you're in no man's land for, up to 6 to 8 weeks post-termination. You won't know what's going on, and that's okay. That is completely okay. If you wanted to learn about where you are in your cycle and what biomarkers you can learn, there are a few resources, across all of my different platforms, but they will be a little bit confusing around this time, right? Because your estrogen, progesterone is dropping, and as they have dropped, then you will start cycling again. So your biomarkers will be really hard to read, and I would be very, very, very careful around any type of intercourse, within 8 weeks of termination, because you will probably be ovulating, and that means that you are possibly fertile. So please don't make the mistake that a few women have made and gone, okay, I've just had this termination, I'm not going to be fertile for a really long time, I won't be fertile until after my next period. But that's just not true. You cycle and you ovulate before you get your period and before you get your menstrual phase, so you need to make sure you're being very, very diligent around that. So first, period timing. For most women, the menstrual cycle will resume between 4 to 8 weeks post-termination, although it varies depending on your individual factors and where you were in your pregnancy stage. So it's typical for cycles to return between 4 to 6 weeks. And don't freak out, but if you do get to that 8-week mark and you still haven't gotten your cycle, please make sure you go back to your healthcare provider and make sure that everything is okay. You may also experience some cycle irregularity. So the first few cycles may be really irregular, and some may experience, heavier and lighter bleeding than usual. Generally, it takes about 2 to 3 cycles for your normal menstrual patterns to fully stabilize. I really believe that, it's 2 to 3 cycles for it to reach full normality if you're not doing anything, if you're not being proactive. So if you apply the steps that I'm going to walk you through at the end of this podcast, then, I think it is going to regulate out a lot sooner, and you will be able to connect with your cycle a lot better. And, I think there is an element of stress associated with this. So focusing on how you can provide a calm, beautiful environment for yourself, that's also going to, release less prostaglandin, so you have less cramping. And also focusing on liver health and a few other things, specifically with cortisol, to make sure that your body feels calm and safe and protected, so your adrenal glands aren't pumping out lots of noradrenaline, adrenaline, and cortisol, so you don't have this, really unstable period after you have a termination. As I said previously, you will ovulate pretty soon after your termination. So some women can ovulate as soon as 2 weeks after their termination, making it possible to conceive again before experiencing a regular period. However, ovulation may be delayed as the body adjusts, depending on how quickly hormone levels stabilize. Because as I said before, if you feel completely okay about your termination, your body is still going to have somewhat of a stress reaction, because this isn't like a natural thing that happens, right? Our body is an ancient mechanism, and we're applying kind of modern science to it. We're taking, we're doing a termination. We can talk about how women have been doing terminations forever with herbs, but still, to our body's perspective, this is an exogenous substance that's impacting something endogenously. So something outside of us that's impacting us inside. So it really depends on your stress levels and how quickly you'll start to ovulate again, because if cortisol is around, it prevents GnRH, so gonadotropin releasing hormone, from releasing, which is the precursor to ovulation. Basically, we can't ovulate if we don't have enough GnRH around. So if you have a stressful experience or you have a traumatic experience, it might take you longer to get your period back, and it might take you longer to ovulate again. If your body reacts to the medication, or you have an allergic reaction, or it was, if it was just kind of your body didn't react well to the surgery or to the termination medication, then again, you're going to release more stress hormones, which means GnRH isn't going to release. So that's why I'm saying, don't just apply the 2-week rule to yourself. You really need to make sure you're keeping in mind that it's going to take, 4 to 8 weeks for you to get your period back. And in that time, you will be ovulating. So you need to be very, very careful. The endocrine system generally returns to, regulating reproductive hormones like FSH and luteinizing hormone, which are essential for the menstrual cycle. And so this rebalancing is going to take a little bit depending on your stress levels. I'd like to start talking about the emotional changes post-termination before Krissy hops on and says her piece on how you can take care of yourself from an emotional and mental perspective after a termination. I'm just going to be talking about your sex hormones and how they impact your brain neurotransmitters. We are going to be talking about serotonin, dopamine, and GABA, and how they relate to estrogen and progesterone. As I said before, after a termination, a woman's hormonal levels, particularly estrogen and progesterone, will shift pretty significantly, and this will impact your neurotransmitters and emotional state. So this hormonal flux can lead to emotional changes, as both estrogen and progesterone play really critical roles in mood regulation due to their effects on neurotransmitters like serotonin, dopamine, and GABA. So let's take a closer look at how this works and each hormone and which neurotransmitter they impact individually. Let's talk about estrogen and serotonin. So estrogen boosts serotonin. Estrogen helps serotonin production, and it influences serotonin receptors in the brain, often promoting a sense of well-being and stability. So after a termination, your estrogen levels will drop pretty significantly, and this reduction in serotonin can lead to feelings of sadness, irritability, or even depression. So the decline of estrogen can contribute to a temporary state of low serotonin, and this may exacerbate emotional vulnerability and create a kind of this feeling of emotional instability or low mood. So what you can do to boost this is tryptophan. So tryptophan's really great. It is the precursor to making serotonin. There's so much tryptophan in turkey, and you can also eat foods rich in complex carbohydrates because serotonin is made in our gut. So we really need to make sure we're supporting the gut. So eating fermented foods, if you can handle it, kimchi, sauerkraut, even things like sourdough bread is really beautiful and supplies us with those complex carbohydrates that our microbiome can eat and eat away at and produce serotonin. And there's also, you can supplement with different foods that kind of give you a bit of a boost, or, herbs that can give you a bit of a boost that we will be talking about later as well. But for the most part, I would recommend St. John's wort if you feel really low after a termination. And, this will come back. Don't worry. This is a very temporary part of the healing process. And, once you start cycling again and you start producing estrogen again, you'll start to increase your serotonin binding and production from estrogen. Estrogen also has an effect on dopamine. So estrogen positively impacts dopamine and the neurotransmitter which is involved with motivation, pleasure, and reward. High levels of estrogen can enhance feelings of motivation and drive, whereas lower levels can reduce these feelings. So if you have an emotional flatness, then this is, we can attribute this to the sudden drop in estrogen, and there can be a reduction in dopamine activity post-termination. So this leads to feelings of apathy, lack of motivation, and even focus as well. You might even see, if you have ADHD, you might see that your symptoms might get really bad post-termination because your dopamine is so low. So you can eat foods that are really rich in amino acid called L-tyrosine, or you can supplement. So I supplement with L-tyrosine pretty much every day because I have ADHD. And, even if you don't have ADHD, post-termination, if you feel like you have no motivation, you just feel very emotionally flat, supplementing with about 500 to 1,000 milligrams of L-tyrosine can be really helpful. If you didn't want to go down the route of L-tyrosine, you can take a supplement with saffron or eat foods with saffron, because saffron can increase dopamine in the brain as well. The other impact on emotions is GABA. And so progesterone has this calming effect, and it increases the activity of this neurotransmitter called GABA. So this helps reduce anxiety and improve sleep. GABA promotes a feeling of relaxation and a sense of calm, which, progesterone enhances by binding GABA to its receptors. So it makes sure GABA stays on the receptors for longer. So if you will probably feel a drop in GABA after a termination because your progesterone levels fall. And they will, right? So GABA will also drop, leading to increased anxiety, restlessness, and difficulty sleeping, which is really frustrating because during the day, you might feel really fatigued, lack of motivation, you feel quite low, emotionally vulnerable from the low estrogen, not binding dopamine and serotonin in the brain and helping its production. And then at night, you might not be able to sleep and you feel really restless because you don't have enough GABA around. So that's just what's happening. And this is something that might happen. Again, high cortisol will exacerbate this. So you always have to make sure you're taking care of your adrenals. But if you feel like you have a drop in GABA, you can also supplement GABA as well. Again, please research and make choices for yourself. This is not personalized nutrition. You can't just take this and listen to it and apply it. You need to talk to someone or do some research and actually make that decision on your own for what you're going to do, but you can supplement with GABA. GABA is great to supplement with if you need help going to sleep in the short term after a termination, and it's also just really great if you feel quite anxious. Also, another thing that you can do is reishi. Reishi mushroom is also going to help with serotonin production because it helps your gut, and it's really beautiful for your liver as well, and it just calms you down. It's really beautiful. You can also, use a little bit of lavender oil. Be very mindful because it can increase estrogen to a certain degree. Also, lion's mane to help you fall asleep is another adaptogenic mushroom that can really help you process the emotions after a termination and help you fall asleep and stay asleep. These neurotransmitter effects are a part of why the emotional systems, and symptoms after a termination can resemble those you usually see in premenstrual phases, kind of your late luteal or, postpartum or even premenopausal. The body needs time to restabilize as these hormonal and neurotransmitter levels and support from nutrient-dense foods. So restful sleep, supplementing with GABA, taking your reishi is really going to help. Also, magnesium glycinate will help you fall asleep as well. And if you can take things like omega-3s for mood stabilization, that might also help as well. So now it's time for Krissy to do her cameo. She's going to talk about the psychological healing post-termination. She's answered all of your questions from the poll from last week, and she'll give you a breakdown on how to heal from grief, sadness, and shame post-termination.
Hello everyone, my name is Krissy. I'm a psychotherapist who specializes in trauma and nervous system regulation, and I help to guide clients through different modalities including EMDR, internal family systems, and somatic therapy, all of which help to release trauma from the physical, mental, and emotional body. And I want to start off by saying that I went through my own termination abortion experience when I was in my mid-20s. And this experience really helped to guide me to be able to help you in healing and answering these questions. Though additionally, as a psychotherapist and through my work in somatic trauma healing, I've also helped numerous clients to process this experience. So I have a really good idea of the subconscious emotional experiences that most women go through in regards to termination. So when it comes to my work, in regards to this topic, the clients I've worked with, I take them through different guided modalities, which usually takes around 45 minutes to 90 minutes. And I want to talk a little bit around why I do that before I answer some of your questions. And it'll just be briefly, but I just want you to get a gist of what's actually going on psychologically in the body, in the mind, physically, emotionally, before we get into your questions. So in the session that I guide clients through in healing abortion or healing from termination, takes up to 90 minutes, but often 45 to 90 minutes. And we really work on energetically clearing your womb. We hold space to connect with your baby's life and soul, to really feel that grief and hold space for that grief. Feeling and processing grief is such a vital part of this experience. And finally, a huge piece is we also work on the shame and really work on developing self-forgiveness within yourself. So it's extremely important to not shove down your abortion experience, your termination experience, and your emotions. Why? It all comes down to muscle memory. So somatically speaking, the female abdomen, or like around that area within our womb, is a powerhouse of muscles inside and out. And it also has the core of your feminine energy stored within your womb. So every single one of your muscles is encased in something called fascia or fascia. I never say it right. So fascia is a network of tissues blanketing every muscle in your entire body. And this fascia stores memory, emotion, and, you guessed it, trauma. So the lower abdomen in women is your emotional center, and it is built up of many muscles. So naturally, this area in your body is more vulnerable to storing trauma than any other part in your body, which is really interesting. So abortion, a massive effect of that is a hit to our emotional body. And within working through this and processing your trauma around this, around your termination, is if you don't do it, you're very likely to feel an increase in anxiety, depression, moodiness, regulation, and even impulse control. You may find that you're more drawn to numbing addictions, like spending a lot more time on your phone, going out drinking, drugs, those kinds of things, like binge eating. All of these kinds of things are more likely to come up as your emotional body is holding more of that trauma. So you may also feel less connected to yourself and therefore others, as you can only meet others as deeply as you've met yourself. So a lot of people will find that when they go through a termination, for whatever reason, whether it be medical termination or a termination by choice, they often feel like issues arise that weren't there prior within their relationships. And this is because of that connection issue, that emotional trauma that's stored within your womb. You feel less connected to yourself. You may be numbing more. You're really struggling to feel into your emotions, into that body, because you are trying to push that experience down. And therefore, from that, you're less likely to be able to connect with your partner and have the relationship that you had prior. So again, it just really emphasizes how important it is to really look at this experience holistically and not push it down. So many of you who may have gone through this experience or are going to may feel that like urge to just address the emotional perspective by reflecting on the experience, or maybe even just seeking a psychologist, like psych support, and talking through the experience with your family or friends. Or maybe you didn't address it all, or you just don't want to address it at all. You just want to forget it and move on. But what many, even though those who are conscious about processing this experience, is that they need to remember that the experience needs to be addressed on that physical, somatic level. Your physical body holds on to experiences just as much as your emotional body. Again, trauma. So I'm going to get into the questions now, but before I do, I decided to give a little special discount code to anyone who wants to book in for that 45 to 90 minute healing session with me. And this is just, I don't usually do one-off sessions ever. I only do session packs or repeat clients. So this is a very special one just for listeners on this podcast. To book in for that 45 to 90 minute session, you can use the code ARCWOMAN and go to my website, www.krissy, Krissy, cares.com.au, and use the code ARCWOMAN, and you'll get a discount code to book in for a specific healing call for termination and abortion. So let's get into the the questions that you've asked. Firstly, the first question is, can having a termination give you depression? Yes, a termination can sometimes lead to feelings of depression, though it isn't universal to everyone. So depression can follow a termination, and this is rooted or stems from unresolved emotional pain, stress, trauma that's stored within the fascia, societal stigma, or it can also be a huge sign of the fact that you have not forgiven yourself for the experience. And there may be a lot of unintegrated shame and grief that hasn't really been felt or expressed, or hasn't been given the space to be felt or expressed. So just to repeat myself a little bit, from a somatic experience or perspective, the body holds on to memories and emotional pain. So depression can arise when these aren't fully processed. And healing to help with depression from termination involves somatic healing, going to a somatic therapist, IFS or EMDR therapist. But some other things that you can do is really just give yourself space to hold space for the grief. So I'll speak throughout different questions in here. A big part of it will be developing daily rituals to really hold space for your emotions. Just putting even a song on and listening to some sad music and just holding your chest and your belly can be a great one, and just feeling whatever comes up. That is so much more powerful than anyone can ever understand. Another thing is also booking in with professional, qualified, trauma-focused breathwork practitioners. And really speaking to them before you do it as well, just being really transparent that you need that support. But trauma-focused breathwork is really powerful as well for depression or just healing this experience in total. So something that I take my clients through as well. So moving on to the second question, how can I stop feeling shame about my termination? So shame can be such a heavy emotional burden, which is really influenced by societal, cultural, and family beliefs. So from my perspective, overcoming shame involves a huge part is developing self-compassion, which so many women struggle with nowadays. And it's because from a young age, we were really told to give to others and not give things to ourselves, including compassion. So forgiving yourself and understanding that you made the best choice for yourself at the time is a huge part. And I'll give some little exercises that you can do. So placing a hand over your heart and just breathing deeply while imagining a sense of self-acceptance just washing over you is a really perfect one to do. Just feeling whatever comes up. Don't be afraid of fear or sadness or anything like that. The biggest thing you can do is just to really not be afraid of emotions, to really feel into them. You can hold them. You have the capacity to hold them. Another thing is grounding practices, just being in nature, having your bare feet on the earth, doing gentle movement. A huge one that I recommend to clients is to do yoga more often, because yoga connects you with your breath and grounding. So that's a really amazing one. And then another powerful exercise that I get my clients to go through is to write themselves a self-forgiveness letter. So write out all of your feelings, emotions, shame, guilt, all of those different aspects of what you're going through and felt during the experience. Write that all down, and then also finish off by writing and really feeling into unconditional love and forgiveness, and write that like you're writing it to a close and loved friend. Give yourself that gift of forgiving yourself and providing that understanding of awareness. Okay, moving on to the third question. How can I face my grief after termination? So yeah, this one, grief is a really not tricky, but it's not a pleasant one that many people, they want to kind of rush through the feeling of grief and be instantly okay. So grieving a termination is normal. It doesn't mean that you made the wrong decision. So I just want to affirm that, like, people think, oh, I'm feeling grief or sadness about like this experience, that means I made the wrong decision. No, it's not right. Like, you can make a decision and still feel grief. So allow yourself to really feel the loss and validate those emotions without judgment. Grief can be processed by engaging in practices that help you release stored emotion as well. So shaking exercises, like getting up and just like shaking your body when you feel those emotions, can help. Gentle stretches, like sometimes like some yin yoga is really amazing. And a big one is just creating space. And another, like bringing up like the daily rituals again, is like crying. Like, allow yourself space each day to feel into your emotions and cry them out. So I recommend creating like a specific time within the day. Like for me personally, it's a morning routine, creating a daily ritual where you can feel into that grief, and include maybe like lighting a little candle, like journaling about whatever's come up. And then also like playing some music as well is a good one, like a sad playlist or something like that, where you can just like put your hands on your heart, feel your emotions and cry it out if you can. So the key to grief and feeling it and facing it is to honor it. The more that you feel it, the more that you will release it. And there's no timeline. Everyone is different. So you really have to remove that impression that you have to be over it by a certain time. The next question that I got was, how can I handle any guilt I feel after a termination? So in question 2, I answered similar one of like, how can I stop feeling shame after my termination? So shame and guilt can often be dealt with in very similar ways. So whatever I said in question 2 when I answered that, I actually want you to go back and listen to that and integrate all of those exercises I mentioned and the processes I mentioned, because guilt and shame go pretty hand in hand when it comes to this topic. So address it by really focusing on self-forgiveness and recognizing your choice was valid, going through writing the letter to yourself for self-forgiveness, that kind of thing. Number 5 is, I can't stop crying. I don't regret my termination, but I can't seem to stop crying. Crying is a powerful somatic release, and it may be helping your body process and release the unspoken and unexpressed feelings. So it's the body's way of trying to release the trauma within your body. Some people think that they are feeling for too long. It's a really common thing that I hear, like within clients that come to me about any experiences, not just this topic, but like, oh, I cry all the time. Like, I feel really sad all the time about this thing that happened. Like, I should be over it by now. It's been a month. Why do I still feel so sad? Firstly, these thoughts only cultivate more negative emotions within you, or what you perceive as negative emotions. So let them go. You are not on any timeline. Secondly, you may need to really work with someone on releasing this somatically. So going and doing an exercise with a therapist like myself for that 45-90 minutes to really hold space for you, so that person can really lend you their nervous system support, so you can feel into the shame, the sadness, the guilt, the regret, and develop that self-forgiveness part for yourself. That is a really essential part to feeling into it. So if it has been a while since your termination and you're still feeling sad, I would go and get support for that, so that you can really feel like you can hold space and really physically and emotionally move on, because the trauma may be still in your womb and in your lower abdomen, and that's what's bringing up the tears and the really strong emotion, particularly if it's been a while since your termination. So even if you regret the decision, I just want to remind you that it's a natural part of the healing process. So, even if you don't regret, I hope I said don't, don't regret your experience, like it's still a part of the natural healing process. So really allow your nervous system to discharge tension and energy, allow yourself to cry, create that daily ritual that I've mentioned a couple of times. And also consider allowing the crying without like self-judgment. Like really try to ground yourself in that experience and don't shame the crying. Like you can't seem to stop crying because there's still emotions there. There's a reason for your emotions. There's a reason for your tears. Don't shame them. Allow them to keep coming up. Create that daily ritual that can kind of integrate and allow that specific time within each morning or within each night or whenever it is that you can express this. The sixth question is, why do I have so much regret even though I 100% knew I didn't want a baby? Regret after a termination can arise from mixed emotions, societal beliefs and expectations, family beliefs and expectations, and feelings of loss that aren't necessarily about the decision itself, but about life and about this baby that you could have had. So regret is a really natural part of processing any significant life event. And holistically recognize that regret is one of the valid emotions in the healing journey. Another really important thing to remember with this aspect is that your physical body is a baby making machine. Like your body is made to make babies. So your body understands and really craves a baby. And so it understood the process of losing that baby. So there's a very physiological reasoning for your regret as well as emotional and just processing a major life event that's happened within your life. There's many aspects to feeling regret around termination. I would highly recommend going through some processes to release emotion and trauma within your womb and really integrate your regret through connecting with Bub's energy and trying to really release that. That will be helpful for you to kind of let go of that regret. Question 7. I still have body shudders 15 years after my termination. How can I somatically release? Body shudders are a huge sign that your nervous system is still holding on to unresolved trauma. So time and trauma, e.g. like the saying that time heals all wounds, is absolute bull. You need to physically and emotionally process trauma after a termination or any experience in order to move on and really heal those wounds. Yes, we can become numb to experiences, but that doesn't mean that that trauma and those emotions and stories and feelings aren't playing out in our subconscious mind, because 90% of our thoughts every day are subconscious, meaning that our subconscious and our body are constantly communicating. So if we have trauma within our body we haven't integrated, of course it's going to be playing out in the way that we think and feel throughout our day. So physically and emotionally processing trauma, even if 15 years ago your termination was there, if you have not done that work to address your womb, to address physically what's going on there, then it's still going to be coming up. It's still something that's affecting you emotionally and physically throughout your life. So go and see someone who specializes in somatic trauma healing, please. But in the meantime, an exercise that you can do to help yourself when that body shudder kind of comes up is an exercise called tremoring, which is the purpose of just shaking and vibrating your body. So when you feel a body shudder come up, go to a private place, just stand up, and I want you to just shake and vibrate your body. And while imagining, like you're just shaking and vibrating, like while you're doing that, I want you to kind of imagine that there's like a color around you. Now, everyone is different, but for me personally, it's green. And a lot of people really like that as well because it's like nature, nervous system support, like regulation. Just imagine whatever color that means to you, like support, nature, regulation, safety, whatever color that is. Imagine it around you as you're kind of shaking your body. And then once that feeling of body tremor starts to go away, body shudder starts to go away, start to really just slow down the movement, slow down the vibrating, place a hand over your heart, really seeing the color around your body. And imagine there's like self-love and self-acceptance just kind of washing all over you. And that will really help to start to slow down those triggers that are triggering your body shudders, so that you can really feel into them.
Isn't Krissy amazing? Hopefully that was really helpful for you. Let's move on to the physical aspects of healing. So pregnancy takes a really huge toll on the body, and it can leave a woman with many depletions. In the time between our termination and our first menstrual bleed, we can make sure that we're focusing on a few key nutrients to revitalize post-termination. So whether you choose the pill or surgical termination, you will be losing a lot of blood as your endometrial lining and the fetus's blood system uses up a lot of iron, copper, and vitamin C kind of in that first part of pregnancy. So first up is iron. So the role of iron is to replenish blood levels and supports energy and immunity. So this might play into that fatigue you might be feeling post-termination. I never recommend you supplement with iron. So if you're listening to this and you're like, okay, great, I'm just going to go get an iron supplement, you need to be very, very, very mindful around iron supplements because they can feed pathogenic bacteria in the gut, and we really don't want to be making sure we're healing the gut and we're maintaining a good internal lining. So instead of supplementing with iron, please make sure that you're using a cast iron to cook with. You can also eat lots of meat, lentils, and even supplement with beef liver. That's kind of the only supplement I would suggest. Also, if you usually have really heavy periods and you have kind of estrogen dominance, then maybe don't supplement with beef liver. Maybe don't increase red meat and lentil intake, because this will exacerbate high iron and, it will exacerbate high estrogen in the body, and it might make your periods worse. And we already are kind of expecting your first period after a termination to possibly be heavy. So that's just something to keep in mind with supplementing or increasing your iron intake post-termination. Alongside iron being used up a lot in the first trimester of pregnancy, the next is copper, because copper aids in iron absorption and regulates the blood system. Copper is also used en masse in the first part of pregnancy to form more blood. So making sure you increase your intake to quell any fatigue is also really, really important. So oysters, cashews, almonds, and again, beef liver is really important. Again, if you have estrogen dominance or heavy periods, supplementing or eating foods that are rich in copper is also going to make estrogen dominant symptoms worse. So again, make sure that this is the right thing for you. Connect with a healthcare provider and make sure that increasing copper is going to be the right decision for you. Alongside iron and copper is vitamin C. So vitamin C boosts collagen production, immunity, and iron absorption. So really important to make sure that you're getting a lot of this. And again, whole food vitamin C is great. If you were going to supplement, go for 500 to 1,000 milligrams per day. You want to be looking for ascorbic acid or buffered vitamin C, especially if you're taking higher doses for iron absorption. And so if you wanted to be eating it in whole foods, in Australia, we have this amazing plant. It's called kakadu plum, and it's really, really rich in vitamin C. It's the most vitamin C rich food on the planet. It's delicious. You can get it in a powder as well. So instead of supplementing, I would recommend, kind of getting a dry powder version of that. Or you can eat citrus fruits. It's really rich in, all of your orange, red, and yellow fruits. So bell peppers or capsicums, really rich in all fruits as well. So making sure you're eating lots of vitamin C rich foods is also going to help replenish your copper and iron stores and kind of boost collagen production and, help your immunity out. Next up, we have our B vitamins, specifically B12 and folate, because they support cell regeneration, nervous system, and tissue healing. So you will probably have kind of a deficiency or lower levels of B12 and folate if you weren't supplementing with it during your pregnancy. So you can get a vitamin B12, 500 to 1,000 mcg daily, preferably in the methylcolobin form, or folate, so 400 to 800 mcg daily, or you can have that in methylfolate, because some women can't methylate their folate properly or unmethylate their folate properly. So making sure you're having like a methylated form of folate is really great, just in case you can't absorb it and use it properly in the body. So as well, instead of just getting the B12 and the folate separately, you can almost always find this in a really good B complex. I really love Ethical Nutrients or Metagenics versions of B complex. They're really, really great. I would also recommend with your B vitamins, have them in the morning because they can help with serotonin production. And so if you were one of those women who feel really, really low post-termination, supplementing with some B vitamins is going to be absolutely essential for you because it makes serotonin in the gut. And so we don't want to be having this late at night because it can be quite stimulating. And if you have that low GABA from the low progesterone post-termination, then you're not going to be sleeping that night either. So we want to be making sure we're having it early in the day with some food, and then during the day your body is going to be making serotonin, and then at the end of the day when your eyes are going, okay, there's no light around, we need to start switching over that serotonin to make it into melatonin, we can start going to sleep. So supplementing with B vitamins is also going to help with your sleep if you're experiencing any fatigue in the day and sleeplessness at night. Next up is magnesium. Magnesium is used in a plethora of different parts of the body, and it's absolutely essential in the formation of a fetus as well. So you're going to have, you might have lower levels of magnesium, and even if you don't, it is just nice to supplement with during this period of time between your termination and your next menstrual bleed. It relieves muscle tension and supports nervous system and emotional stability. So taking 200 to 400 milligrams a day. If you were going to take magnesium, please take magnesium glycinate. It's really gentle on the digestion, it's highly bioavailable, and the magnesium citrate will just make you go to the bathroom. Oxide is okay, citrate is probably the worst. But if you didn't want to supplement with magnesium, you can also eat foods that are rich in magnesium, like black beans, cacao, and avocado. It's really beautiful just to integrate as a healing, as you're healing. And I like to take my magnesium glycinate in the day, because then it works during the day to calm your nervous system down so you're ready for bed, or you can just take it before you go to bed. It really depends on what you'd like to get out of it. Next up is zinc. It's really great for wound repair. So depending on, how your healing process is physically after, possibly a surgical or the pill termination, you will have, in your uterine line, you might have a bit of a wound from the fetus and from your termination. So supplementing with zinc is really great. So 15 to 40 milligrams a day is really great. And it's really essential for immune support and tissue repair. So if you have any microbiome shifts post-termination, zinc is also really important for you to take. Again, I really love the Metagenics and Ethical Nutrients. It's kind of the same brand. Ethical Nutrients is kind of out the front, Metagenics is out the back. You kind of have to ask for it. I think it's around 40 milligrams per day that you can take. It's a beautiful formulation. I highly recommend that one if you are looking for a brand to support. It's an Australian brand. Otherwise, if you just get any type of zinc. So, zinc citrate is really well absorbed, and take it with food so you can avoid nausea as well. Last but certainly not least is omega-3 fatty acids. So these are really important because they help mood stability. They also really reduce inflammation, and you're going to have lower levels of omega-3 because in the first, part of pregnancy, we're forming the central nervous system of the fetus, and we're also going to be forming the blood system. And so the central nervous system is going to use up quite a lot of omega-3s, and if you weren't supplementing with this during your pregnancy, then you are going to be low in it. So supplementing with 3,000 milligrams of combined EPA and DHA. I just love a good quality fish oil. I think everyone should be taking it all the time. Omega-3 fatty acids are going to be really important to make sure that you're supporting your liver as well, because as our liver is processing all of this estrogen and progesterone, it's going to be needing, some anti-inflammatories. It's going to be needing some support from that part. It's also just really great to heal emotionally after a termination. Even if you're like, I feel completely fine, omega-3 fatty acids are just going to be really great. Once you're integrating a few of the different things that Krissy has recommended to you, omega-3 is really going to support that mental support. Alongside this, I just want to talk about how we can support our stress. So breath work is really beautiful. So parasympathetic breath work, so breathing really deep, doing some breath holds. I love Breathe with Sandy. He has some amazing videos up on his YouTube channel that I recommend to most of my clients who have high stress levels. And the reason why is because we want to integrate more vagus nerve stimulation. So we're convincing our system that we are calm and that we are safe, right? So we're not releasing all of this cortisol, adrenaline, and noradrenaline all of the time. So we can get our cycles back to normal faster. And so we're actually absorbing these nutrients, because if we're stuck in kind of a trauma response or a stress response, cortisol is going to tighten up all of the blood vessels near our digestive tract and in our brain as well. And it's going to force all of the blood from our, prefrontal cortex, where we think clearly, to our amygdala and our stress regions of the brain. So we won't actually be able to think properly, and it's going to impact serotonin, oxytocin, dopamine production, and it's also going to stop us from sleeping. So supporting your adrenal glands is one of the most important things that you can do post-termination. So making sure that you're drinking electrolytes, so making sure you're not just drinking plain water. Please make sure you go and get like a good quality electrolyte. It's really worth the money in this period of time to support your kidneys and your adrenal glands. As well, you can make sure you're integrating a supplement like reishi is really, really great for supporting cortisol and decreasing cortisol production. I also really, really love lemon balm and lavender and chamomile. So these are really beautiful just to have as a tea every single day. So we're keeping a calm central nervous system. If you're using that breath work, and we're also utilizing that reishi, electrolytes, and if you wanted to be taking some adrenal cocktails as well, adrenal cocktails are amazing. It's just Celtic sea salt, some coconut water or coconut cream, either way. I love using both, to be honest, and some orange juice. It's just so beautiful. You blend it up with a little bit of ice. If you have one of those a day, that's really going to give you all of the electrolytes if you don't want to take an electrolyte, and it's going to support your adrenal glands. Last but certainly not least, let's talk about some herbs for healing. So after a termination, certain herbs can offer gentle support for recovery, and they can help the body to heal physically and providing some emotional balance as well. So here are a few herbs that I think are commonly used post-termination and how they can benefit women in the post-termination period. I'm going to reiterate again here, please work with a healthcare practitioner to make sure that these herbs are actually good for you. First up, we have raspberry leaf. So raspberry leaf is known for toning and strengthening the uterus. Raspberry leaf is really beautiful for supporting natural recovery after any uterine changes. It's also really high in minerals like iron and magnesium, which can be really beneficial. So you can have 1 to 3 cups a day with 1 teaspoon of dried leaf per cup. We have motherwort. Motherwort is such a beautiful herb to be using in this period of time. It's traditionally used to support emotional well-being, to calm the nervous system, and it also helps uterine health, helping ease discomfort and facilitate a natural recovery. So you can have in a tincture 15 to 30 drops 1 to 3 times a day, or you can have it in a tea if you want, but I think a tincture is going to be the best to have motherwort in. Yarrow is also really beautiful. It's known for its gentle supportive action, promoting circulation and aiding in tissue repair. It makes it really useful for wound healing, and it's also used to support the body in regulating a menstrual cycle after any changes. You can drink this as a tea, so 1 to 2 cups daily with 1 teaspoon of dried herb per cup, or you can use it in a tincture, so 15 to 30 drops of tincture 1 to 3 times a day. St. John's wort is really beautiful, especially if you need some mood stabilizing properties. It's really beautiful for supporting emotional recovery and relieving feelings of sadness and anxiety. It just lifts your mood. It's such a beautiful thing to integrate in this period of time after a termination. It can also be really helpful for reducing discomfort, as it's a known anti-inflammatory. So you can have 300 to 600 milligrams of standardized extract 1 to 3 times daily, or you can have 20 to 40 drops of a tincture 1 to 2 times daily, or you can have it in a tea as well. We also want to be making sure that we're supporting the liver, right? So St. Mary's thistle is one of the most popular herbs that you can use to support the liver. We want to be helping the liver during this time because it's going to be digesting all of the progesterone and estrogen and HCG that were made during your pregnancy. And so it's going to be digesting them and popping them into the digestive tract. It's known for its potent liver supporting properties. Milk thistle helps the liver process and clear any residual medications and excess hormones from the body after termination. It also contains something called silymarin, and it is a compound that promotes liver cell regeneration and supports detoxification and digestion, and it aids in hormonal balance and overall recovery. So you can have 200 to 400 milligrams of standardized silymarin extract, or you can have 20 to 30 drops of tincture 1 to 2 times a day for each of them. So each of these herbs as well, you can take them as teas, tinctures, or capsules depending on personal preference. But again, always consult a healthcare practitioner before starting any herbal supplements, especially if you're combining them with any medications. And you just always have to keep in mind what supplements you're using and if they will impact the effectiveness of the herbs that you're putting into your body during this time. On top of this, I just wanted to go through a few different hotlines that you can reach out to if you feel like you need some help. So I'm Australian, so let's start in Australia. We have Children by Choice. It offers post-abortion counselling and support in Queensland. You can call 1-800-177-725 and their website is childrenbychoice.org.au. If you're in Canada, you can reach out to Hope for Women and offers post-abortion support through phone and email. You can find them at 1-866-846-9602 and their website is hopeforwomen.ca. If you are in the USA, you can reach out to Exhale Pro Voice. It provides non-judgmental post-abortion support and counselling. You can text Exhale to 617-749-2948. They're available from 3 p.m. to 9 p.m. PT. Their website is exhaleprovince.org. If you are in New Zealand, you can reach out to Family Planning New Zealand. It offers support through clinics and helplines. You can reach out to 0800-463-654. You can also reach out to pregnancy counselling services in New Zealand. They support post-abortion and support over the phone. You can reach out 24/7 to them at 0800-773-462 and their website is pregnancycounselling.org.nz. If you're in Europe, you can reach out to the Abortion Support Network. It offers practical support for people seeking abortion care in Europe. You can reach out to abortionsupport.org.uk. I'm aware that there are many women listening to this podcast who aren't in those countries, so I'm going to give you 2 options for an online chat service that you can reach out to. So the first one is Option Line. It's a worldwide chat option. It provides chat support on pregnancy options, including post-abortion support, and you can look up optionline.org. The second one is Safe to Choose. Offers online counseling and resources for safe abortion and post-abortion support worldwide, and their website is safe2choose.org. I really hope that this podcast was affirming and calm. I really hope that you feel supported through your choice and this answered all of your questions. If you needed to book in with me, you can do so at arcwoman.com.au. Krissy's books are also open if you have any post-termination trauma that you'd like to talk to her with. All of this information will be in the show notes if you need to reach out to either of us for a consultation. To close up this conversation, I really hope that this podcast supported you and you feel better for having listened to it. I hope that you feel supported and loved. Please know that you are supported and loved throughout this decision. I know it's really challenging to make. No one makes this decision very lightly. I hope that you are dealing with it okay and that everything in this podcast was able to aid you and heal you and guide you towards a healing path, healing after post-termination. I hope you have a beautiful evening, morning, afternoon, wherever you are in the world. Bye.